This morning's service was to have been a service celebrating the end of the congregation's annual stewardship campaign, the end of UUCM's annual pledge campaign. And it was also to have been a service welcoming the very newest members of this congregation. And since those are still both very important things to do, we'll look for other ways to accomplish them, including incorporating some of the newest members in these online services. But given the nature of this particular moment and this nearer presence of the COVID-19 virus with all its ramifications, it felt important to honor this particular aspect of our lives this morning. The title of this service, when we planned it a couple months ago, was simply Life, the Universe, and Everything. And yes, as some of you might expect, that was indeed a nod to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, with its humorous take on the search for the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. And since then, as we're facing this virus, what comes to mind is the encouragement on the cover of the book, don't panic. More seriously, it was a reference to the reasons members commit to support this congregation and its mission to create a world more compassionate, sustainable, and just, and a reference to the reason people join religious communities in the first place. Although we understand it and frame it in many different ways, in the end, religious community is always about the search for meaning and connection. Whether we find that connection ourselves most directly through ideas and concepts, or values and commitments, or the very visceral experiences of our bodies, or through the very deep, heartfelt connections, emotional connections we feel with others. The shared journey of this congregation is always a never-ending discernment of what matters most now and why, and therefore how we best live our days. In the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, the answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything is revealed. For those of you who don't know it, I'm about to tell you, in case someone within earshot hasn't already called it out. The answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything is the number 42. I once heard Douglas Adams explain that as he was writing this series, he would periodically, and quite frequently, stop in his writing process, and he would take the most outrageously distant idea that popped into his mind, just randomly, and then he would insert that thing prominently right into the storyline. And that's why a towel, for example, figures so prominently in the series, and a Chesterfield sofa. Life feels that way sometimes, doesn't it? With its random reversals of fortune, and its random arrivals of all kinds of things in our lives. And the current moment feels a bit like that, though people have been warning us for many decades that a pandemic would arrive at some point, and that we ought to be prepared, not surprised by it. In our Unitarian Universalist tradition, the answers to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything are not spelled out for us, and neither are they permanent. The answers are continually being discerned by each of us in community, dancing with the questions together. When I talk about my closest friends, those friends with whom I feel I can be most vulnerable, I'll often say, as I'm describing those relationships, that we can talk about life, the universe, and everything. In fact, that we do talk about life, the universe, and everything. The point being not merely just the wide scope of what we talk about, but the quality of our conversing, the deep quality of the conversing, no matter what we're talking about. In Unitarian Universalist congregations, a key spiritual goal is to cultivate the quality of our conversing, no matter the topic. Right now, more than ever, faced with the danger of a life-threatening, world-transforming virus, the meaning questions come flying to the surface. What really matters, and why? How should we live in this world now? What does my life mean? What meaning does it have? And what meaning shall we make of all of it? So an important part of our work as a community is to find ways to continue our shared searching and our conversing while we're each relegated to our newly separated spaces, to connect meaningfully while we're on this new road together. At the same time, the introvert in me sees that we have an important opportunity to honor the spaciousness of this time for its invitations and its gifts. A couple Sundays ago, I shared Reverend Lynn Ungar's wonderful piece titled Pandemic. Reverend Lynn begins, "What if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times?" Referring to these times, what if you thought of it as the Jews consider the Sabbath, the most sacred of times? This morning, I'd like to extend Reverend Ungar's invitation to approach this sequestered, life-altering time not as a nuisance or a mistake or a terror, but as potentially the most sacred of times. A once-in-a-lifetime, prolonged Orthodox Sabbath, perhaps, outside our usual ruts and distractions and automatic pilot behaviors. A Sabbath set aside for us to face in deeper, more honest, more frightening probably, ways ourselves and the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. To jump traditions for a moment, I feel like we've all been placed, without being asked, in a remote Zen monastery of sorts for an extended and rather severe retreat. A retreat not simply because we are away, sequestered in our separate small spaces with simplified amenities and away from our usual distractions, but because in this kind of space, for this amount of time, with these kinds of worries and questions, we will be confronted increasingly by the most elemental aspects of who we are. I know that I'm already seeing more of who I am as a minister, as a leader, as a neighbor, as a human being faced with an external human-delivered danger. I am learning more about who I am. One of the first times I went to type the new portion of this sermon title, The Most Sacred of Times, I transposed the A and the C in the word sacred and typed instead, the most scared of times. Oh, I love typos for what they reveal or for the new perspectives they can inspire. Maybe I was feeling a little more frightened than I was letting myself realize. This may be, for many of us, the most scared and the most sacred of times. Sacred not because we're scared. Sacred not because this time is inherently any more or less sacred than any other time. But sacred because of what we'll have a chance to make of it, if we're willing and able to enter it fully, with awareness and attention and reflection. It is so powerfully disorienting already. It's already inviting us to reorient ourselves and our priorities, and I can scarcely imagine what it will invite in several weeks. As we take shelter in our homes, reaching out to connect in the ways that we can, let's also allow the distances and the spaces and whatever spiritual, emotional, intellectual reversals of fortune we are experiencing to affect us meaningfully. Through our intentional internal work, through our spiritual practices, as well as through the ongoing conversations about what matters that have moved now to text and phone calls and email and Zoom sessions, that deep conversing that we continue. It's tempting to take refuge in these spaces. I know I'm certainly tempted to take refuge, to try not to be too affected by what's happening in any given moment, and that will be important. It will be important to our well-being to allow that kind of distance once in a while as we need it. But I found myself thinking about Doug Kraft's retake on the concept of refuge and on the three refuges in Buddhism, as perhaps one set of doorways we might use to enter this time as sacred time. Doug Kraft is a minister emeritus of the Unitarian Universalist Society of Sacramento and a student and a teacher of Buddhist meditation. Traditionally, he points out, there are three refuges in Buddhism. One takes refuge in the Buddha, one takes refuge in the Dhamma or the Dharma, and one takes refuge in the Sangha. Doug writes that the most obvious understanding of these three is first taking refuge in the historic Buddha Gautama as a guide and a teacher, as an exemplar showing the way. Taking refuge in the Buddha's teachings and wisdom and practice in the Dharma. And finally, taking refuge in the community of fellow seekers, the Sangha. But, Doug adds, since the Buddha insisted always that we take our own deepest experience as our ultimate guide, which is what we do in Unitarian Universalism as well, we prioritize our personal experience as the final decider of truth and what matters. It's left in our hands, in conversation and community with others, but our personal experience is the final word, as it is in Buddhism. And, Doug continues, since we each have our own Buddha nature that we can rely on if we listen deeply enough, then we can think of taking refuge in the Buddha, he says, as taking refuge in our own true selves. Now that we are so much by ourselves or with small groups of people, the invitation of our sequestering and our reactions to what's going on will be to discover and uncover more of our truest nature, the most real you. I bet you're catching glimpses of the real you already. I know I certainly am. The Dhamma, Doug writes, literally means law, but not human laws, rather natural laws, the truth of how things actually work. And so he reframes that second refuge as taking refuge in the truth of how things really are. An unlikely refuge, it would seem, at the surface. Facing the truth of how things really are is something we sometimes avoid. But honestly, if we can face that truth, we're actually positioned better in the world for our own well-being and the well-being of others. The invitation of the virus and everything that is unfolding in response to it is to see beneath the surface, of our lives and our expectations and our assumptions, beneath the relative ease we have had, to see with newly open eyes the truths of the world, the full range of how things really are. When we can do that honestly, taking this time to do that honestly, without denying it or turning away or running, we are indeed in a refuge that will serve us well, that will serve our spirits well. And the Sangha? The Sangha is a refuge we know well. The refuge of community, of our community of fellow seekers after the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. For Doug, that means not only the current community, but also all who have traveled this path before. If absence was ever to make the heart grow fonder, now is the time. We will not return as the same persons who went into our homes with our bags of dried beans and our packs of toilet paper, if we could find them, into these refuges that invite not ease, ultimately, but courage and depth. The invitation of our physical distancing is to discover the more subtle aspects of our need for social connection, for the sake of our emotional, our spiritual, our intellectual well-being. And the invitation is also to expand our sensitivity and our ability to connect. We can actually grow our connection capacity by having to work in new ways and work a little harder at it, perhaps. As Reverend Lynn Ungar put it in Pandemic, we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now, she adds. Here too we have a chance to come out the other side reoriented toward the most true in us when we gather in person once again and connect in those more visceral ways. Teresa Inesoto pointed out in a reading we used earlier in the service that people wake up to ordinary days all the time. But my friends, these are no ordinary days. If we can find it in us to take perhaps uneasy refuge in our own true nature as it's revealed to us, if we can brave taking refuge in the sobering, magnificent, inconvenient truth of how things really are without turning away or running, if we can take refuge in this, our very human, imperfect, and vulnerable community, a community of seekers, our companions on this journey even now, then this could indeed become the most sacred of times. May it be so for you. May it be so for us. May it be so for humanity. So may it be. Amen.